somewhere in the Andromeda sector, floating serenely among the stars like a particularly expensive piece of cosmic real estate. The Galactic Preservation Institute maintained its reputation as the premier facility for endangered species conservation. This wasn't your average zoo with sad animals and overpriced snack bars. No. This was a 300-level biodome complex, housing creatures from over 6,000 worlds, staffed by the galaxy's most. According to YouTube analytics, 98% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel, that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Qualified xenobiologists, geneticists, and behavioral specialists. Each species received custom-tailored environments, nutritionally optimized meals, and enrichment activities designed by committees who took their jobs far too seriously. The Institute prided itself on safety protocols that would make a paranoid android weep with joy. 72 layers of containment fields, biometric scanners every 15 tranquilizer systems that could drop a thorax bull elephant in 2.3 seconds, and enough warning klaxons to wake the dead, which was ironic because the facility had never experienced a single fatality in its 4-century operational history. Their safety record was so pristine that insurance companies practically paid them to exist. Working at the Institute attracted a peculiar sort of individual. The Quins, with their crystalline exoskeletons and compound eyes, dominated the security forces. They were a cautious species evolved from prey animals on a world where being jumpy meant living long enough to reproduce. The Talaxian researchers, floating in their environmental suits filled with ammonia-based atmosphere, brought methodical precision to genetic analysis. A handful of Quarian engineers, built like upright bears made of muscle and bad attitude, maintained the mechanical systems with the kind of efficiency that came from a cultural obsession with things working properly. And then there was the human. Nobody could quite remember when the Terran had been hired or why, given that humans had only been part of the galactic community for roughly 30 standard years. The human worked in Section 7, which housed juvenile predators from high-gravity death worlds. This was considered the least desirable posting in the entire facility, the kind of assignment you got when you'd angered someone important or demonstrated a remarkable lack of self-preservation instinct. The human seemed perfectly content there, wandering between enclosures with a data pad, making notes and occasionally making sound that approximated speech when forced to interact with colleagues. On this particular rotation, during the third feeding cycle, everything went sideways faster than a Quelling could say. I told you this would happen. Vexarian cub had arrived 6 weeks prior, confiscated from exotic animal traffickers who tried smuggling it through the Deneb checkpoint. Vexarians were apex predators from a world where apex meant capable of eating starships if sufficiently motivated, 6-legged, scaled with retractable claws that could punch through standard hole plating and a jaw structure that suggested evolution had specifically designed them to ruin someone's entire day. Adults stood 4 meters at the shoulder and hunted in coordinated packs across Vexar Prime's volcanic highlands. The cub, currently 3 months old, was merely the size of a Terran pony and possessed all the threat assessment skills of a concussed fruit bat. Security officer Real Talk had been assigned cub monitoring duty, which mostly involved standing outside the reinforced, transparent barrier and ensuring the creature didn't spontaneously develop teleportation abilities. Quellins took their security protocols seriously, obsessively. Their entire evolutionary history consisted of being eaten by things until they got really, really good at not being eaten by things. Real Talk had survived 2 decades in institute security by following every regulation, double-checking every sensor, reading and maintaining a healthy paranoia about anything with teeth. The incident occurred at 1447 station time. Real Talk performed his standard enclosure inspection, running the biometric scanner along the barrier's edge, checking for fractures in the transparent aluminum composite. The Vexirian cub watched this ritual with the intense fascination of a creature whose brain contained approximately 3 thoughts, all of them variations on play, food, and nap. When Real Talk crouched near the barrier's lower section, the cub approached, making a chirping sound that xenobiologists had classified as juvenile contact, vocalization, and everyone else recognized as baby animal being cute. What happened next would be debated in incident reports for months. The cub extended one paw through the feeding slot, a small opening designed for automated meal delivery. The opening was supposed to be sealed between feeding times. Someone had forgotten to engage the lock. The cub's paw, roughly the size of a dinner plate, emerged with claws retracted. Real Talk, startled by the sudden movement, jerked backward, but not before the cub's mouth followed the paw through the opening, not attacking, not biting with intent, just doing what juvenile predators across the galaxy do when exploring their environment, putting things in their mouth. Specifically, Real's finger. The guard's scream could be heard in 3 adjacent sections. The emergency response klaxons activated automatically when his biometric readings spiked into the experiencing grievous bodily harm range. The cub, frightened by the noise, released immediately and retreated to the back of its enclosure, making distress sounds that would later be described in official reports as terrifying predator vocalizations, but were actually closer to a puppy crying because someone yelled at it. Blood dripped from Artok's finger, not a lot. Thoroughly unimpressive amount, really. The kind of minor injury that rated maybe 3 out of 10 on any reasonable pain scale, but Quellins possessed different pain tolerances than most species, their crystalline nerve structures registering damage. Impressive enthusiasm. Within 45 seconds, the entire Section 7 emergency response team materialized. Medical personnel surrounded Real Talk, scanners buzzing, treating the wound with the gravity of battlefield triage. Security forces established a perimeter around the Vexirian enclosure, weapons drawn as if the cub might suddenly develop human-level intelligence and orchestrate a facility-wide breakout. The human arrived 60 seconds later, drawn by the commotion like a particularly unenthusiastic moth to a flame, still holding a half-eaten sandwich in one hand and the data pad in the other, taking in the scene with the expression of someone watching paint dry in slow motion. What happened? The human asked, voice flat. Vexirian juvenile attacked specialist. Real Talk, one of the security officers, shouted, maintaining aim on the enclosure where the cub huddled in the corner, visibly trembling. Severe lacerations, possible toxin exposure. We're implementing containment protocol. 7. The human walked closer, examined. Rito's finger with the clinical interest of someone checking if milk had gone bad. The wound was perhaps 2 cm long. Shallow, already clotting, no torn tissue, no exposed bone, the kind of injury you'd get from a particularly aggressive paper cuts bigger brother. That's not an attack, the human said, taking another bite of sandwich. That's a nibble. 20 pairs of alien eyes turned toward the Terran. The medical team paused their frantic treatment. Security forces exchanged confused glances. Somewhere a cooling system hummed with the awkward silence. A nibble, real talk. Repeated, voice pitched higher than usual. That creature attempted to consume my appendage. No, the human corrected, gesturing with a sandwich for emphasis. If it attempted to consume your appendage, you wouldn't have an appendage. That's a baby mouthing something, exploring, playing. My neighbor's Labrador did worse damage too. My shoelaces. Your neighbor's what? Domesticated predator, lives in houses, eats kibble, licks faces. The security team absorbed this information with visible discomfort. The concept of domesticated predators living inside dwellings remained one of those human peculiarities that the galaxy found deeply unsettling. The protocols are clear, the shift supervisor announced, compound eyes reflecting the emergency lighting. Any aggressive action by a Class 7 predator requires immediate administrative review and possible behavioral modification or termination. The human's expression shifted slightly, not quite anger, more like the look someone gets when explaining basic mathematics to a brick wall and realizing the brick wall might actually be winning the argument. You're going to kill a baby animal because someone left the feeding slot unlocked and a guard got startled. Regulations exist for personnel safety, right? Safety. The human looked at the Vexarian cub still cowering in the corner, making soft, distressed sounds, then back at the assembled security force, weapons trained on an enclosure containing what was objectively the galaxy's least threatening apex predator. You know what? Fine, do they review? I'll be there. Someone should explain how juvenile animal behavior works before you execute a toddler for teething. The human left, still carrying the sandwich, leaving behind a group of aliens who suddenly felt less certain about their emergency protocols and significantly more confused about Terran in general. In the enclosure, the Vexarian cub whimpered quietly, completely unaware it had just become the center of a bureaucratic nightmare that would reveal some uncomfortable truths about humanity's place in a galaxy that thought it understood predators. By the time the administrative review board convened, the incident had been elevated from minor workplace accident to catastrophic security breach with potential facility-wide implications. This was how bureaucracy worked across the galaxy. Take a molehill, add paperwork, multiply by committee oversight, and congratulations, you've built a mountain, complete with documentation in triplicate. The conference room occupied level 12 of the administrative wing, designed with a kind of aggressive neutrality that suggested someone had looked at the concept of boring and decided it needed more gray. Holographic displays lined the walls currently, showing the Vexarian enclosure from multiple angles. The review board consisted of 7 members representing different departments, species, and philosophical approaches to not getting eaten. Director Venshaw presided. Talaxian, whose floating environmental suit hummed quietly as atmospheric regulators maintained the ammonia mixture keeping her alive. She'd run the institute for 73 standard years, surviving 6 different administrative reorganizations and approximately 4,000 emergency meetings just like this one. Her tenure had taught her that most crises were actually minor inconveniences that people with too much authority had inflated into crisis. The security representative, Commander Thexar, was a Coronian who looked like someone had crossbreed a grizzly bear with a tank and given it anger management issues. He took facility safety with the seriousness of a religious calling. The medical officer, Dr. Preux, brought her Quellen perspective and a holographic display showing the injured finger from 17 different angles. The remaining board members represented genetics, behavioral sciences, facility operations, and legal compliance, and the human sat at the end of the table looking like someone attending a funeral for a house plant. Let's review the incident chronologically. Director Venshaw began, her translator rendering her chemical-based communication into standard galactic at 1447 station time. Security specialist Rail Talk sustained injuries while performing routine inspection of enclosure 773. The perpetrator was a juvenile Vexarian. Catalog designation VX447. Approximately 3 months developmental age. Perpetrator, the human muttered, quiet enough that only the nearest recording equipment caught it. Commander Thexar activated the holographic playback. The incident unfolded in crystalline detail, the guard crouching, the paw emerging, the moment of contact, the scream, the chaos. The board watched in silence. When the playback ended, several members exchanged meaningful glances that suggested they'd already reached conclusions. The evidence clearly demonstrates aggressive predatory behavior, the security commander stated, his deep voice making the conference table vibrate slightly. The creature deliberately targeted Specialist Railto's extremity, employing its primary offensive weapons in a calculated attack. It put a paw through an unlocked feeding slot. The human interjected, then followed up with its mouth, because that's what babies do. They explore with their mouths. Puppies do it, kittens do it, human infants do it, and we don't even have proper teeth. At that age, the creature is not a human infant. Obviously, human infants can't punch through hole plating when they grow up, but the behavior is identical. Developmental stage appropriate. Exploration. Dr. Preux manipulated her display, expanding the image of the injured finger. The wound required 17 minutes of medical intervention. We documented tissue disruption, minor hemorrhaging, and significant psychological trauma to the victim. 17 minutes because your entire medical team descended on a scratch that needed maybe a bandage and some antiseptic. The human replied, I've gotten worse injuries from rose bushes. You're what plants with thorns. We grow them decoratively. Sometimes they fight back. The board absorbed this information with a kind of silence that suggested they were adding another item to the increasingly long list of inexplicable human behaviors. Let's hear from the victim, Director Venshaw suggested, probably hoping this would move things along. Specialist Real Talk, please describe your experience. The guard attending remotely via hologram due to being on medical leave appeared at the table's center. His crystalline structure still showed stress fractures in the light, though these were likely more psychological than physical. I followed standard inspection protocols, maintained proper distance from the containment barrier. The creature waited until I was vulnerable, then struck without warning. Its predatory instincts overcame any conditioning. I genuinely believed I would not survive. The human's expression suggested experiencing physical pain from restraining. Commentary. The feeding slot was unlocked. The Terran said carefully. Who unlocked it? Automated systems handle feeding schedules. The operations representative explained. The slot should have resealed immediately after meal delivery. Should have, but didn't. So this is actually a mechanical failure, not an animal behavior problem. The creature still attacked. The creature investigated something new in its environment using age-appropriate methods. Look at the playback again. Watch its body language. Director Vencio restarted the hologram. This time the board watched more carefully. The cub's approach cautious but curious, tail in neutral position. Ears forward but not flattened. The paw extending slowly, claws retracted. The mouth following, gentle by Vexirian standards, releasing immediately when startled. I see aggressive posturing. Commander Thexar insisted. You see a baby being curious, the human countered. Everything about that body language reads playful exploration, no stalking. Behavior, no prefixation, no attack. Posture, just a juvenile predator doing what juvenile predators do when they're bored and something interesting happens. And what precisely qualifies you to interpret Vexirian behavioral patterns? The genetics representative asked, not unkindly. Your species has been space faring for barely 3 decades. We've studied Vexarians for centuries. The human leaned back, considering the question with the careful deliberation of someone choosing between several equally sarcastic responses. Humans coexisted with large predators for our entire evolutionary history. We didn't just study them from behind barriers. We lived with them, competed with them, eventually domesticated some of them. I've personally worked with Terran predators that would consider a Vexirian cub a light snack. This isn't arrogance, it's pattern recognition. Across species, you're claiming equivalent experience with a creature from a world you've never visited. I'm claiming that predator behavior follows certain universal patterns: fear responses, play behavior, social bonding, bite inhibition in juveniles. These things transcend individual worlds. A baby Vexarian exploring with its mouth is functionally identical to a wolf puppy doing the same thing. Wolf. Several board members echoed simultaneously. Apex predator hunts in packs. Humans domesticated them approximately 15,000 years ago. Now we keep them in our homes, sleep in the same rooms with them, and let them interact with our children. The board sat in stunned silence. The concept kept getting worse the more they thought about it. You're saying humans voluntarily cohabitate with apex predators? Dr. Prilix asked weakly. We call them dogs. There are currently about 900 million of them living with human families across Earth and our colonies, multiple breeds, different sizes, all descended from wolves. We've also domesticated cats, which are smaller predators with a frankly sociopathic disregard for human Authority, those are more popular. Roughly 1.5 billion of them. This explains so much about your species. Director Venshaw murmured. The point, the human continued, is that I know what an actual predator attack looks like. I know the difference between aggression and play, and that cub was playing badly, without supervision or proper socialization, because it's a baby that was stolen from its family and is probably traumatized and confused. Nevertheless, Commander, the Zeller said heavily, regulations are explicit. Class 7 predators demonstrating aggression toward personnel must undergo comprehensive behavioral evaluation. If rehabilitation proves impossible, euthanasia protocols will be implemented. The human's jaw tightened. You're going to kill it because your safety protocols are written by species that evolved as prey animals and can't distinguish between exploration and attack. We're going to follow established procedures designed to protect everyone in this facility. Fine. What does this evaluation entail? Director Venshaw consulted her data pad. The creature will be assessed by our most experienced predator behavioral specialist in a controlled environment. If it demonstrates continued aggression, unstable temperament, or inability to modify threatening behavior, termination becomes the recommended option. Who's your most experienced predator behavioral specialist? The board exchanged glances. Several members suddenly found their data pads fascinating. We were hoping, the director said carefully, that you might consent to performing the evaluation. The human blinked once, twice, processing the absolutely ridiculous logic loop they just created. Let me understand this correctly. You think the cub is dangerously aggressive. You want me to evaluate whether it's dangerously aggressive, but if I'm qualified to make that evaluation, shouldn't you trust my current assessment that it's not actually aggressive? The regulations require formal evaluation with documented evidence, so you need me to prove what I've been telling you for the last 40 minutes. Essentially, yes. The human stood, chair scraping against the floor with a sound that made several board members flinch. I'll do the evaluation, but when I demonstrate that the cub is harmless, we're rewriting your behavioral assessment protocols, because clearly they were written by people who have never actually worked with predators. If you can prove the creature is safe, we'll certainly consider procedural modifications. Director Venshaw agreed diplomatically. Great. When do we start? Tomorrow, 9 or station time. We'll prepare the evaluation arena and ensure all safety measures are in place. Safety measures, meaning weapons trained on a baby animal, while I try to show you it's friendly. Standard protocol. The human left without another word, leaving the board to contemplate what they just agreed to. In the silence that followed, Dr. Prilix voiced what everyone was thinking. Does anyone else feel like we just made a terrible mistake? Probably, Director Venshaw admitted. But at least it will be well documented. Somewhere in Section 7, the Vexarian cub slept in its enclosure, completely unaware that its fate would be decided by a species that kept apex predators as pets and thought rows bushes were adequate security risks. Evaluation arena was designed for containing aggressive megafauna during behavioral assessments, which meant it looked like someone had built a gladiatorial combat zone and then added clipboards, reinforced walls, Observation platforms behind transparent barriers rated for small arms fire and enough emergency containment equipment to stop a stampeding herd of thorax bulls. Approximately 40 staff members crowded the observation deck, pressed against the barriers like spectators at the galaxy's most depressing sporting event. The Vexirian Cub sat in the arena center, looking significantly less threatening than the facility's safety theater suggested, still making those soft, distressed chirps, still confused about why its entire world had become strange and frightening. The human entered through the personnel airlock wearing standard duty uniform, no protective gear, no weapons, just a tan walking into an enclosure with a creature that could theoretically disembowel them with casual effort. "This is insane," someone whispered from the observation deck. "This is humans," someone else replied, which wasn't actually a contradiction. The human approached slowly, body language relaxed, making soft clicking sounds with their tongue. The cub's head lifted, ears swiveling forward. Recognition flickered across its face, if one could read Vexirian expressions, which apparently the human could. "Hey, there, little one," the Terran said quietly. "Remember me, I'm the one who brings the good food." The cub stood hesitant, then took 3 cautious steps forward. Its tail, which had been tucked close to its body, began a tentative wag. More steps, faster now, and then the cub did something that made half the observation deck gasp in horror. It charged, 6 legs pumping, closing the distance in seconds, and the human just stood there like someone waiting for public transportation. The cub crashed into the tan at full speed, and instead of mauling, it rolled onto its back, exposing its vulnerable belly, tail wagging so hard its entire body wiggled. The human crouched down and rubbed the cub's stomach. The observation deck fell silent, except for the sound of several staff members reevaluating their entire understanding of predator behavior. "Belly rubs," the human announced, looking up at the cameras. "Universal sign of trust and submission across roughly 80% of predatory species. This cub isn't aggressive, it's lonely and scared and desperate for social contact." The human produced a ball from their pocket. Through it, the cub scrambled after it with the coordination of a drunk giraffe, retrieved it, brought it back, dropped it at the human's feet. Repeat. This continued for approximately 10 minutes while the galaxy's finest xenobiologists watched the apex predator play fetch. "Someone explain what I'm seeing," Commander the Zeller demanded. "Play behavior," the behavioral sciences representative said weakly. "Voluntary engagement, social bonding." "Exactly what the human predicted." The Terran sat cross-legged on the arena floor. The cub immediately climbed into their lap, which required some creative physics, given their size difference, and proceeded to fall asleep with its massive head resting against the human's chest. "Any other questions about whether this cub is dangerous?" the human asked the observation deck. Nobody had any questions. They did, however, have several concerns about humans. The emergency board meeting reconvened with significantly less confidence than the previous session. Director Vin Shah looked like someone who just discovered their entire worldview required firmware updates. So she began carefully. "The evaluation suggests the creature poses minimal threat. The evaluation suggests you're all ridiculous," the human corrected, still brushing Vexirian scales off their uniform. "That cub is about as dangerous as a particularly enthusiastic throw. Pillow, yet it has the biological capacity for lethal force, Commander. The Zeller argued, though his conviction had noticeably diminished, so does literally everything if you try hard enough. I once knew someone who got a concussion from a falling coconut. We didn't declare war on tropical fruit. The board exchanged uncomfortable glances. Dr. Prilix pulled up a data file that had clearly been compiled in frantic research sessions. We've been investigating Terran fauna, specifically these domesticated predators you mentioned. The psychological profiles are deeply disturbing. You researched dogs. We researched everything. Your species cohabitates with creatures descended from pack hunters. You selectively bred them into hundreds of variations, some small enough to fit in carrying containers, others large enough to overpower adult humans, and you let them sleep in your beds. Some people let them sleep under the covers, the human added helpfully. Several board members made distressed sounds. The felines are worse, another representative added. Obligate carnivores, retractable claws, enhanced night vision, documented cases of them knocking objects off elevated surfaces for apparent enjoyment, and you keep approximately 1.5 billion of them. Cats are fantastic, low maintenance, independent, excellent pest control. You also keep animals called geese, which, according to our research, are universally feared despite being herbivorous waterfowl. Geese are demons, the human admitted, but that's different. Director Venshaw manipulated her display, showing images of Earth animals, horses powerful enough to kill with a single kick. Humans ride them recreationally. Cattle, literally bred for consumption, yet cause numerous human fatalities annually. You keep venomous reptiles as pets. You swim with sharks. You have entire professions dedicated to handling creatures that could easily end your lives. Our point is that your species has a completely inverted threat assessment matrix compared to the rest of the galaxy. What we consider dangerous, you consider normal. What we consider lethal, you consider companions. The human shrugged. We evolved alongside predators, competed with them, learned from them, eventually befriended them. Makes sense. We'd be comfortable with them. It makes absolutely no sense, Commander. The Zeller muttered, but it does explain why you're the only species willing to work in Section 7. Speaking of which, the cub needs proper socialization and enrichment. I'm implementing new protocols. What kind of protocols? The kind where we treat juvenile predators like juvenile predators instead of ticking time bombs. Playtime, social interaction, basic training, normal animal care. Director Venshaw sighed, the sound translated as bubbling. Chemicals, fine. New facility guideline. If the human says an animal is safe, we trust the human unless it involves geese. Obviously nobody trusts geese. 3 levels down, the Vixarian cub dozed peacefully, dreaming whatever apex predators dream about, completely unaware it had just revolutionized galactic animal handling through the simple act of wanting belly rubs.